Hello, good afternoon. My name is Chris and I'm the founder and director of the Northern Ireland Science Festival. You're all really welcome to this year's digital edition of the programme. We're really excited this year to be partnering once again with Libraries NI and really thrilled to be bringing you this afternoon's speaker, Dara McAnulty. Dara is simply one of our favourite people. His most recent book, Diary of a Young Naturalist, has been winning accolades all over the world. A special thanks must go to Libraries NI for hosting this event. And if you do like what you see, please hit that like button, hit subscribe and follow us for more content at nisciencefestival.com. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Valerie and thank you for joining us for this Libraries NI event for the Northern Ireland Science Festival. Just to say, the audience won't be able to be seen or heard throughout. However, if you would like to comment, you can do so by typing in the chat box. The event is going to be recorded and will be going out live on the YouTube channel. It's a real privilege for me to welcome our guest author, Dara, this afternoon, Dara McAnulty. And Dara's going to be in conversation with another local author, Shirley-Anne McMillan. I'm looking forward to hearing Dara speak about his connection with nature and the great outdoors, and of course with his absolutely brilliant book, Diary of a Young Naturalist. For those of you who haven't already read the book, you can nip down and borrow it from your local library, where it's available through the Book and Collect service. Details of the Book and Collect service may be found on the Libraries NI website. The book is also going to be available to download in ebook format later in the year. Anyway, enough from me, and without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to hand you over to Shirley and Dara.
Thanks very much, Valerie. Hello, welcome to the Northern Ireland Science Festival in conjunction with NI Libraries. I'm Shirley-Anne McMillan and I'm going to be talking to the writer and activist Dara McAnulty. I know Dara because my husband Ian and I work in Shimna Integrated College, where Dara is a student. So we have the great privilege of being able to say that we knew him before he was famous. Dara leads our eco group in school and we're really, really proud of his success as a writer and general media star. But he's also a busy A-level student. And as somebody who tries to balance, working and writing books, I know I am personally really in awe of what he's achieved over the last few years. I certainly couldn't have done that whenever I was a school student. You're probably all aware of Dara's writing success. Diary of a Young Naturalist was published by Little Taller early in 2020, and it has won many awards and accolades. I'm not going to list his entire Wikipedia entry, but do go and read it for yourself. It is very impressive. As Valerie was saying, you can pick that up in the libraries, and it's also available from No Alibis. There should be a link on YouTube to that after. So among the awards that Dara has won was the prestigious Wainwright Prize for Nature Writing, and also the Books Are My Bag Award, which I'm mentioning because I am personally very envious of that award because it's the one that's chosen by readers. Dara has also won the RSPB medal, which was previously won by Sir David Attenborough. He has appeared on BBC Countryfile and Springwatch, and he's read his book on Radio 4 whenever it was Book of the Week last year. Diary of a Young Naturalist has now been translated into other languages, and I gather that Swedish is the next one to come next month. He's also secured a book deal for 2 further titles, Wild Child for younger readers, which will be published by Macmillan in June 2021, and another one, which will come along later. You can see the cover for Wild Child behind me here, and it's absolutely gorgeous. The illustrator there is Barry Falls. It's just beautiful. And if you don't have a copy of Diary of a Young Naturalist, I would definitely encourage you to go and get one. There's illustrations inside as well, and it's just a beautiful thing. So Dara has become very, very famous for his writing about nature and also autism. And you really only have to read Diary of a Young Naturalist to understand why that is. It's absolutely beautifully written. And it's a book that helped me personally during the first lockdown of spring 2020. I was lucky enough to get an advance copy. of the book. My dad used to have a job in conservation in Northern Ireland. His name is John Milburn, for anyone who might know him. And for a time, he was the wildlife inspector for Northern Ireland. So I was very lucky growing up to have been able to share in some of what he did. We had things like injured peregrine falcons in the back garden, and he'd bring home the odd bat and things like that. But despite this, Diary of a Young Naturalist is actually the first nature book that I have ever read. And to be honest, I wasn't really sure that it would be my thing. But it really did transform my experience of lockdown. The first time around, I found myself paying much more attention to the little tiny things in nature. I found myself doing things like planting flowers, which is anyone who knows me will know is completely unheard of. I enjoyed my walks a lot more. I took time to just be outdoors. And so, although I know it was really, really hard for a lot of writers to have a book out during lockdown when they couldn't have a proper launch or celebrate properly, and I think it was definitely worse for debut writers as well. In some ways, it was the perfect time to launch this book. A lot of people found it very helpful, I think. So now we are in lockdown again, and this time it's winter. So I wanted to ask Dara, a little bit about that. I found a lovely quote this morning from the winter section of Diary of a Young Naturalist. Of course, I've just pulled the my placeholder out. I will try and summarize it rather than trying to find it again now. Dara, you had said that in the winter section, which was written now a few years ago, that you had found actually the spring and summer sections quite difficult and quite a hard time, but the winter time for you brought healing. So I am sort of wondering how winter has been for you this time around with having lockdown. Has it been harder to find ways to connect with nature, or is it just like a bit different? What's that like now?
I feel like everything has been a little bit more difficult with lockdown. It's meant that you can't really explore and sort of feel your way around the world, because I still feel like I'm pretty new here in County Down, because I've only lived here for a few years and I don't really know all of the little nooks and crannies yet. So exploring was always a part of my life, and lockdown did hurt me in that sense, but this winter has actually been somewhat like under any normal circumstances, this winter would have been amazing for me because we got snow. And that's for me is always the sign of the seasons, and it actually snowing in winter, not in March or April, which has been the normal for the last few years. And so I was like jumping with joy when the snow was falling out of the sky, and then proceeded to nearly catch hypothermia by doing like a few hour long hike up into the forest park during a blizzard, which is complete, like, don't do that. It's really, really not clever. But I was so enthralled by the snow that I was just, when the excitement sort of takes a hold of you, snow just gives you that excitement, doesn't it? It's like, because you only ever see it for like a few days or once a year, and so when it happens, it's like a massive thing. Especially here, because like we get like a frosting of snow, like half a centimeter of snow, and to have it be actual deep snow, I was like, so this winter, if it wasn't for the lockdown, I feel like would have been the best winter for a good long time. But with the lockdown, it has dragged a little bit, because and one really surprising thing that has come out of these lockdowns is, for the first time in my life, I'm craving social interaction. And anybody who knows me is like, oh my goodness me, what on earth is wrong with him? Because like I'm usually never wanting any sort of social interaction at all, and now I'm craving it. It's kind of terrifying. And I feel like all of our senses have been sort of flipped in a sense. Because it's almost like a completely different world. And I feel like nature for me has given me some semblance of a constant, a way to look at it and say, oh my goodness me, it's the same world. It's just that we can't explore it. And it gives me a grounding, an anchor to sort of go, okay, and everything's fine. It can go back to normal.
Yes, I really got that impression from your book as well. I think that's one of the reasons I loved it so much, was because, you know, it was so accessible to do that, to just actually sit outside and not necessarily have a purpose for doing it, but just to be there and notice things.
Yeah.
And notice that, yeah, those things are actually always there. No matter what's going on in politics or with the virus or anything. I think it was so important. So speaking of books, in your diary, you mentioned that libraries are really important to you. You mentioned the Ormer Road Library in Belfast and Newcastle Library. How important do you think libraries are right now? I mean, we all have devices where we can download books. So, you know, why do we need libraries, or why are they so important?
I feel like libraries are still really, really important, because you go into a library and there's just so much stuff there. It's like, it's a repository of knowledge. And I remember I would just go into there like a kid in a sweet shop, because there was just all of these books. And I'd like to give a shout out to Karen, who guided me through the library on the Ormer Road, and was a great friend to satiating my thirst for knowledge, because it feels bizarre, but I didn't read anything other than like fact books, like non-fiction fact books, until I was like 10 or 11. I was just like, it's not real, so it's not important. Now I absolutely love not fiction books. But back then I was just wanted to know everything. And libraries seem to have all of the knowledge in the world in them. And as a child, that was really, I could just sort of explore all of these different worlds and know that they were real, in a sense. And libraries still have that importance, because when you go and you download a book, I feel like you're going out and searching for, usually it's because you're searching for a book. And you're going to go, oh, I've heard about this book, so I'm going to go and search for it. But when you're in a library, so it's sort of, a book sort of catches your eye. Yeah. And you might go for something that you never really expected that you might want until you see it. And because you're borrowing the book, and because it's free in that sense, I feel like everything's just so much more accessible. You can feel like you can expand yourself in that sense. So I feel like libraries will always be really, really important, because they give that access, and that access is so important, because it's like a platform from which you can grow, and I feel like that needs to be preserved.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, Dara. And it is different being in a place where the books physically are. Then, I mean, you can browse around, you know, online bookshops or whatever, but to be in the place, you're absolutely right. You do pick up things that you might not have thought of. And then libraries mean that you can just take it away and read it without worrying, oh, am I going to be able to afford this or whatever? It's brilliant. And it's interesting you mentioned about your reading as a child as well. I have a 6-year-old who's autistic, and he is exactly the same. Absolutely loves fact books. He loves his encyclopedias. He loves animal books, ocean books, space especially, but not really that interested in storybooks.
The eyewitness books. Have you ever seen the eyewitness books in the libraries?
No.
Well, they're these sort of white fact books, and they've got lots of pictures in them. And if anybody knows those books, you'll know that they seem to have an infinite number of them. I have read every single one. It took me quite a few years of constantly borrowing them out of the library, but I've read nearly every single one. So if anybody knows the Eyewitness books, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Well, thank you so much for that. I've written that down, and we'll be seeking them out. So I was going to ask you actually what you read when you were little, because someone had asked a question, and I should say some people have sent in questions, and one of them was about, did you like animal stories when you were little? We have Martin Waddell in Newcastle, who writes these beautiful stories about animals, like the Owl Babies and the Big Bear, Little Bear stories, and they're lovely. And so someone had asked, did you like those kind of books? And the answer is no. So
I kind of did. Like, I feel like there was the sort of stories that get read to you as a really young child. So they sort of just percolate into your brain. But I sort of just wanted knowledge, and I just sort of, like, one book that I always seem to come back to was the Big Bang book. I mentioned it in my book because I feel like every single week, the 2 weeks like expiry date that you have in the library, every single 2 weeks I would go in and I would get the same. I think I've memorized every single word in the book, and there was a little section on like mythology, and I feel like mythology was my first step into the fiction space because it didn't feel like fiction. So that it's sort of, mythology for me really did just start from learning about facts, and then history, and then stories, which became really, really important to me.
I want to ask you about mythology, and Irish mythology in particular, because it comes up so often in Diary of a Young Naturalist. But before we go there, could you tell us a wee bit about Wild Child, because I know that's aimed at younger kids. Is it a factual type book?
It's about 50-50. I try to put myself into a young child's view who is experiencing the natural world for maybe the first time. And it was really, really refreshing to do that, because I got to be a young child again and have that wonder, that almost childish wonder and joy, which I like. I feel like when you keep on listening to the news and it sort of fades a bit, but being able to write this book, this children's book, reinvigorated that for me. And I went out into the garden and I saw a blackbird, not just as a blackbird, and all of the facts that surround it, but as a feathery thing with orange beak, beady eyes, hops about in the grass, wondering what it was eating, and what just trying to wonder and to try and see the world. And then I also put in lots of facts as well to sort of, I wanted the book to be a stepping stone, in a sense, to show young children how incredible the natural world is. And there's some pretty interesting concepts in the book, and I've tried to make them as simple as possible because it's for children, but it's the sort of stuff that isn't really taught in primary schools. And that was a big thing for me when I was in primary school, that I was everything sort of just was cut out to just get you through the transfer test, in a sense.
Yeah.
It was maths, English, can you spell, can you do your basic arithmetic? And they would focus on basically nothing else. And that for me was quite saddening, because I was just like, we were once told by a teacher to cross out the science bit of a booklet because it wasn't necessary for the transfer test.
It sounds really brilliant, and I really think my youngest will absolutely love it. So I will be pre-ordering that as soon as I can. So talking about things that you didn't learn in school, I was really fascinated to read Dara, Young Naturalist, and how many Irish language references there were, and the folklore. Irish folklore as well. There's a brilliant glossary at the back of the book if you haven't read it yet. And I mean, you could just sit and read it on its own. It's so interesting. I've just read Karina Doherty's book, which has just come out, which is called Thin Places, and that is the second nature book that I've ever read. So I think that's probably your fault as well, Dara. It's very different to your book, but they're both autobiographical, and both of you seem to have this real connection with Irish language and culture as linked to nature and the physical landscape. So you feel like you're not just reading a book about nature, you're reading a book about Ireland. And I find that really interesting as someone who was brought up in a Protestant school and never was given the opportunity to learn Irish at all, and really knew very, very, very little of Irish folklore as well. I think we did Finn McCool and that was it. So how important do you think that education around Irish language and culture is to people here to be able to connect with the natural environment? Do you think all young people should have access to that? What's your views on that?
I think that learning about folklore and stories is so important because it's our way of trying to look at the world, in a sense, to try and explain the world through stories. And that tradition is so powerful that it's allowed for tales and legends and stories to be passed down through thousands of years. And I find that just incredible to even think about, that we're telling almost the same stories that we did all centuries ago. And that idea that we can look to the stars and the sky and the land that surrounds us and see it through the lens of story, it gives it such a richness to it and layers. And it's one of the things that I've, with you mentioned that I've got another book that's coming on the way, and it's going to be called Wanderings of a Young Naturalist, and it's going to basically be me exploring that idea of mythology and storytelling and the nature that it was based off, because they're so interlinked. I found that stories and the land that surrounds them are so connected, because they almost seem to run off each other, because all ideas from humans seem to spring from nature. We look to it and we gain inspiration from it. And so I'm trying to explore that idea in this new book. And I'm going to go to all sorts of places and explore the myths behind them. And I'm very, very excited to do that. It's going to be called Wanderings of a Young Naturalist, and it will be published at some time in the future, because I don't really know, because all dates seem to be like strange at the moment. So I'm not even going to make an attempt to try and say when it's going to come out. But I'm really, really, really excited for it. And it's like a dream come true for me, because myths were so important to me in storytelling. That has to be worth something.
Yeah, I mean, just to hear you saying that, like, it just sounds so obvious, but it's not. I mean, again, this is new for me to consider our language and our culture as really that much linked to the actual landscape. So I think it's great. There are probably quite a lot of people that have the experience that I had of, you know, sort of being divorced from the land in a way. So I think it's really important that you're doing that. It'd be really great, Dara, if you would read a wee bit for us now. I'd love to hear something from Diary of a Naturalist. If you have a piece there you'd like to read.
Okay, let me just get my placeholder, my little sliders. So, wait a second. Okay. Okay. God. So it's my granddad's birthday today, so I wanted to read this little excerpt from the book about a special memory with my granda. So happy birthday, happy birthday, granda. We've only stopped briefly at Peatlands Park, a nature reserve just off the M1, to break the journey back to Fermanagh, where we're heading for Granda Jim's birthday. He's 70 this year. It'll be so good to be with him and Nanny Pamela again. We haven't seen much of them since we've moved east to County Down, and they're always so enthusiastic to spend time with us. Nanny is a couple of years older than Granda and has the energy of someone half her age. Granda has such sparkling eyes and the kindest soul. Going west again feels halfway home and halfway to heartbreak. The interlude at Peatlands Park is welcome, a stretching of our legs with Frog before we travel the rest of the way. While we drive on, my thoughts wander to one of my first proper memories of being with Granda. It was when we were visiting the Crum estate in Fermanagh. Lorcan wasn't born yet. The image is completely lucid. We're walking on a path adjacent to the ruined castle, which stands on the edge of a high bank overlooking Lough Erne. I drop down to listen for grasshoppers, but don't realize it's too cold to crouch down on the grass. I remember Granda's hand in mine as he told me about when he was born and how he walked miles to school every day. He told me how his father made saddles and school bags and delivered the post. I was mesmerized by his lilting voice, his gentle nature. Mum thinks I invented the memory from a photograph because I wasn't even 2 years old, but I'm convinced it's real. Maybe I processed more of it when I was older, attached new memories. But that moment left such a deep, warm feeling. I'm sure I was babbling on about something, probably starting with, "Did you know?" I talked early, which was tough for everyone because I never stopped talking, asking questions, retelling facts about space or woodlouse. Granda was so patient. He listened. And as we walked, the long grass tickled my legs. Usually when I was out in local parks or playgrounds, I was taunted and mocked because of my longing to pass on information, to talk. It wasn't welcome, and it made me a target for bullying. But there was none of this with Granda Jim. He listened, talked, and lifted me up in his arms to look at the castle. We felt the stone walls together. I kissed his head. That day was one of my first memories, and I hold it tenderly close. I saw the sadness in Granda's eyes, the way that Mum hugged him. Her daddy, always daddy. I can't remember stopping off to see his old cottage after the castle, but Mum has told me about the twisting and turning roads to Creve Cross, and the driving further on into countryside until a Dairet was whitewashed, not much bigger than a tool shed. Apparently, I couldn't believe that so many people could fit inside. I still imagine the countryside around the cottage is perfect, with open skies and hawthorn everywhere. I'm taller than Granda now, and when we arrive at the pub, it's all hugs and hellos. I embrace him and Nanny extra tightly, because life is fragile and achingly beautiful. Happy birthday, Granda.
Happy birthday from me as well. That was so lovely, Dara. Thank you very much. I mean, for people who haven't read your book already, I think they'll be rushing out to get it after this, because it is just so lovely. And what an amazing thing for you to have to pass on as well, and a lovely tribute to your family. The whole book is really. Your family have been very encouraging to you and your interest in nature. I know that some of your siblings are homeschooled as well, I think. And you get the impression that your family is just really, really close. You've also had really good feedback from parents, I think. I remember a tweet that you had maybe a couple of weeks ago about a message that you received from a mother who had been struggling to homeschool her child during lockdown and had read your book and basically taken them outside, and they had found this whole way of education that just hadn't really occurred to them before, and her child was so much happier and more relaxed. And I think she ended off by saying she was now thinking of homeschooling permanently because of this, which was just amazing. I got the impression from your book that your parents saw education as something that is really important, but also something very personal to each individual. So I'm wondering if you have any advice to parents who want to encourage their kids to get more involved with nature, especially maybe if they love video games and they're inside a lot of the time. And what about like things like climate change? How can you get children interested in those things? And especially, maybe what if they're in a city or when they're not out in the countryside? Obviously, read your book Wild Child is the first step, but have you got any other advice for parents?
I think the most important bit of advice I'm not really an expert in this subject, but I feel like the most important thing is to let them be children, in a sense. Let them be kids, let them explore, no matter where it is. Let them climb the tree, let them explore their world, because that's so important. And to not shut it down, in a sense, like saying that that's dirty or don't touch that or don't do this, because it just sort of puts up barriers, I think, to close down the world that you're living in. And I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with allowing them to play video games like I do. I feel like it's just a part of the world that we live in now. And I feel like just letting them be children, letting them go outside, being with them there, and I let them run free a little bit, because that allows it just allows that so much more of self-expression and confidence in themselves, because I feel like that's the thing that really gets a lot of people is confidence. And you can't have that if every single almost area of your life is controlled, in a sense. And to remove that sort of sterile environment of in school is the place where you learn, and bring that little bit of education into the home. And even if you're in a city, just taking the time to go outside, maybe go to the park, let them pick up conkers or feathers. I remember, I've been collecting feathers for years, since I was a very young child in Belfast. They're mostly pigeon feathers, but they didn't really matter to me. And the feel of them was what really mattered. And when people say, oh, but that's dirty or that's not safe, in a sense, has always felt ludicrous to me, because I've said this many, many times, but I'll say it again. I have I've been collecting feathers for a long, long time. I've even held many different types of bird pellets with my bare hands, and I have not died of any strange diseases yet. Or so it's probably fine.
That's great. And I am 100% guilty of that, Dara. So I'm really glad you said that. I mean, it's the feathers thing. You know, when Owen goes to pick them up, I'd be like, oh, don't touch that. But I will not do that anymore. So thank you. I appreciate that. Talking in that bit you read about your grandfather, you mentioned bullying. And you talk a lot in Diary about your experience of mainstream education, which has not always been brilliant. And you talk a lot about being autistic as well. And I know a lot of parents of autistic children do worry about things like bullying and whether or not mainstream education can really help their children. So I'm glad to say you haven't experienced that bullying at Shimna. But how can schools be better for autistic young people? And do you think the outdoors has a part to play in that? What can we do?
Well, when it comes to bullying, I feel like it's such a traumatic experience to try and admit to being bullied, because you're brought into a room and you're told to write out a statement of exactly what they did to you. And usually when someone's bullying you, it's very rarely them beating you up every day after school. Usually it's isolation. It's picking at you, the small chiseling away at your psyche, slowly degrading you and making you feel absolutely rubbish inside. And then when you're brought out and said, okay, and you've admitted to being bullied, so what did they do? You say, well, you can't really put your finger on it. Mm-hmm. And it's like, and then you get really, it's traumatic. And I feel like there needs to be a better system for dealing with bullying and dealing with how people are treated, because it just ends up being really, you don't feel like you can do it. And then at the end, you make up and it's like, shake hands and it's all good. And then next day they go, it just goes back to it. And you're like, well, what can I even do here?
Yeah. And I think that probably people don't, a lot of people probably don't realize exactly what bullying can be as well. And they may think, well, I'm not a bully. I haven't done anything, as you've just said. So that's really interesting to hear that.
And then if you even, and the problem is that if they degrade you so much and then you break, it becomes your fault, which is a whole, it's a massive issue that really needs to be resolved. But I feel like nature was my escape from that. It was my way out, because it was a place where I had no judgment. It was a place where I could stare at trees all day and have no one, and the trees weren't going to talk back to me. So it's like, it felt safe. It felt a place where I could be, where I wouldn't be abused in that sense.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that the school's eco group, you'd read the part that I'd read about bullying just the other day. You had said that in the initial stages of the eco group, you were quite worried about what people's reception would be to that. But then it was okay, and people actually were really getting into it, and they had loads of questions and things. When I was at school, we also had an eco group, but what we mainly did was crushing aluminium cans, and we did plant daffodils at one stage. But your group seems to be a bit different to that. So for those who don't know about it, could you tell us a bit about the eco group?
Okay, so our eco group is about education. Mostly it's about showing how incredible and wondrous the world is, and focusing on that aspect a lot more than most eco groups, because I've tried and failed many, many times to get up an eco group. In every single school I've been to, I've tried eco groups, and the first one they just flat out refused, because apparently it was wasting teachers' time. The second one, there was an insurance thing with ladders, which was a bit strange. And then with Shimna, it just happened, and I'd like to thank Miss Caulfield for allowing us to really get because she was just like, okay, let's do it. And I feel like that attitude to projects like this is so valuable these days, because it's that little bit of confidence to say, okay, we'll just do it. It completely changes people's lives. It makes you feel like, yes, we can do something. We can make a difference. We can actually, it can actually bring joy and enrich the mainstream education that we all seem to live in. And it was really big for me, because, as I've said, I've tried it many, many times, and to have it succeed and to have people get amazing response from it was incredible, because it was like, oh my God. And we can be heard, and we can have our voices realized. And so that actually gave me a real boost of confidence that I've been severely lacking due to the bullying, because that's the other thing that bullying does. It just destroys your self-confidence and self-esteem, because makes you feel like you're nothing. And the eco group made me feel like I was something. And
yeah, that's so great, because I mean, it has been really brilliant for the school as well, and I know it has been super popular. I mean, like, you know, why wouldn't it be? It just sounds like such a great thing to do. So that, you know, that's your activism in a way, as well as your writing, but you also took part in the youth climate movement right from the kind of beginnings. And you wrote in Diary of a Young Naturalist about standing out there with your sign all on your own for 4 hours. And and I remember that. At the same time, Greta Thunberg was doing a similar thing. And then youth climate movement seemed to kind of take off, and suddenly the world's attention was brought to these young people who were organizing, and more and more and more people got interested in it. So I think there's, I've got a wee quote about that as well, just briefly. I found this really interesting. You'd said, all the grown-ups are telling us how amazing this generation of activists is, commending our actions on social media or in the press, while doing what themselves? My generation has pulsed, that is exciting. But what doesn't sit well is the search for leaders, climate leaders, young leaders. The expectation seems preposterous. It appears I'm now one of them. Just one single act of walking out and I've been crowned. It doesn't sit easy. It's not me at all. I was at a symposium about Europe and the child at Manchester Metropolitan University last year. And someone called Ben Bowman, who was speaking in his area of expertise is youth and climate issues. And something that he said that I just can't forget since then is that young people don't want to be heard, they want change. So enough of the, like, get everyone together and we'll listen to these young people, or invite them to our meeting and we'll listen to them, or, you know, here's a forum and we'll listen to you. You know, what about the change? What about what's happened next? So I wanted to ask you that, even though you're kind of a reluctant leader, do you think you're going to continue doing that kind of protest action, or where's the youth climate movement at now? Are you going to be part of that?
I'm still trying to find my place in activism, but I feel like it's been coming to me more quickly. Is that I enjoy writing so much, and I feel like the role of the writer and of the artist is to try to inspire wonder in people, And it's wonder that drives attachment and connection to the natural world. And with that, we can provide that motivation and determine, like, make ourselves determined to protect it. And I feel like we have to love something to be able to want to protect it. And so that's what I want to do, is to try and show people how incredible our world is, and why it's so important, because it's the most miraculous thing in the world. All of these systems so beautifully interlinked, our life support system that seems to keep everything in balance perfectly. It's in a state of equilibrium, and it's incredible. And I want to show that, in a sense, and because it's the what protects what makes us human is our ability to adapt, and our ability to look at the world with optimism and hope that we can make it a better one. And it's because it sort of makes me think that it wasn't, when we look at myths, especially in stories, in Celtic stories, there had to be a storyteller to tell the first one and to show their admiration of the world, and to share their idea. It wasn't everybody who did this. And once you see that, it becomes almost what makes us human is how much we care. And I feel like that's what I want to do, is I want to show how much I care about the natural world through writing and writing books. And I feel like that's my place now. And as much as I enjoy doing the climate protests, being out on the street, I feel like it's almost necessary, because if we manage to solve this crisis, what happens next? If we solve this crisis due to fear, what happens when that fear is removed? Do we fall back into old habits? Do we go back, and do the crises come back up again and again and again in this cyclical cycle of destruction? But if we solve these problems because of wonder of the world and how incredible it is, then they probably won't come back up again, because we love this world and we can see how important it is. And I think that's what I want to try and show, is that wonder, because I see it as the only way of assuring a bright future for this world.
That's a real true change as well, isn't it? I mean, the writer Ben Okri has said that if you change the stories that you tell, you will change the world, because it's so personal. So it would be great if you would read another piece, Dara, from Diary, just before we come to close.
Okay. I held out my hand to feel the tickle of the wind. A blackbird might never choose to nest and lay its eggs in my palm, but I know that my hand will always be outstretched to nature and to people, because we're not separate from nature. We are nature. And without a community, when you're always on your own, it's more difficult to share ideas and to grow. I'm so used to keeping my thoughts locked inside and being in a space where it's only me and my family. But now there are concentric circles rippling out for a digital online world into the very real world of activism, social action, and interaction. It keeps on rippling. I have to drift and swirl with it, but I'll always need to retreat back to the foundation stones of myself. The vernal equinox has come and gone now, and I'm on the cusp of my 15th birthday. Midway between late childhood and adulthood, everything and nothing has changed. Again, Seamus Heaney's words are with me. Kevin feels the warm eggs, the small breast, the tucked neat head and claws, and finding himself linked into the network of eternal life. At equinox a couple of years ago, we visited Caldra Graveyard on Bow Island in Fermanagh, a nestled place, tucked behind the lake shore, hugged by a circle of trees. Bluebells were everywhere, and some had been picked and placed on one of the early Christian Janus figures in the dipped hollow of its stone head. These almost 2,000-year-old figures both look forwards, but in different directions, a duality. And that's what I felt on that day. I was 13, small in every way, but with big thoughts. I put my hands on the stones and felt a rumbling ancestral roar. It was the sort of sound your mother might make if she were scolding you to warn that your life was in danger, urgent, pleading. I felt the heat of it when I placed my hand on my cheek. On both Bow Island and Glendalough, with the traces of St. Kevin, I felt gateways opening, choices to make, roads to travel. I have a longing to spend more time with the intricacies of nature, without the interactions and complications of people. I yearn for this simplicity, but I also want to go out into the world and weave my way, however overwhelming and painful it might be. Nature and us, at odds and at one. As I ran to join my family for the last stretch of the walk at Glendalough, leaving St. Kevin and the Blackbird behind, a solar glare draped over us, connecting us to the land with its invisible strings. A longer, heavier line is about to be cast out into the world. My heart is opening. I'm ready. And that's from the ending of my book and one of my favorite little passages of the book. And I feel like that was a massive turning point in my life. That realization that we can make change in the world through stories and through community. And I feel like that community has been strained over the course of lockdown, but has also been made stronger by our almost strength of spirit as a species to come together and to tackle these problems that are facing us, and shows how resilient we are. And I feel like that's something truly special and that deserves to be preserved.
That is so great. Thank you so much, Dara. What an amazing message to kind of leave with here. In your first reading, you had ended with the line, "Life is fragile and achingly beautiful." And I think that as we go off here today, we'll all be kind of thinking along those lines. It's so lovely as well to hear your voice as you're reading. I haven't heard your audiobook yet, but it is really, you're really great at reading your own work. So if there was one thing that you could tell people or advise people as something we need to do or could do to prolong this fragile and achingly beautiful world, what would the one thing be that you'd like us to go away with?
I would love if everybody just takes that few minutes to look outside into the world and just take a few minutes to notice it, to notice all the little details, because in the detail we see beauty. And when all the details come together into this beautiful web of our world, we can see how incredible it is. And by just taking those few moments to notice it, it can just expand what you see in front of you.
thank you so much. And that's exactly what I got from Dara when I read it. So that's so great. It has been a real joy and delight to talk to you. I feel so chilled out now. I feel like that's been like a meditative hour for me, sitting here talking to you. And it's been lovely actually to prepare for this interview this week. I have been reading through Diary again, and it has just been great. So please, everyone, go and get yourself a copy. It's wonderful. And thank you so much. Thanks to Northern Ireland Libraries and the Science Festival. But huge thanks to you, Dara, for being with us today and sharing your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. It's
all right.
Incredible.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.